There has never been an airplane like the Mig-25, living like a play. In addition to the unique Soviet aesthetics of violence emanating from its body, its entire service life, accompanied by stories of deception, betrayal, and helplessness. Before we talked about Lieutenant Belenko driving the Mig-25 defection before and after. In the Gulf War battlefield 15 years later, the outdated Mig-25, hard to meet the battlefield headwinds, and once again become a star, nearly shredded the US Army F-15 undefeated record of aerial combat. Samarra Air Battle, the epic curtain call battle of the Mig-25 Foxbat. On the afternoon of January 30, 1991, Captain Mahmoud Awad, an Iraqi pilot, took off in a Mig-25 from Qadsia Air Base. At the same time, his colleague, Mohammad Jassim as-Samurai, also took off in a Mig-25 from Tammuz Air Base, not far away. This was a long-planned operation, and the two men were determined to break the American blockade and reclaim their own honor. From Saddam ordered the invasion of Kuwait, provoked the war counting. Time has passed nearly 6 months. At this time the Iraqi sky has long been the world of the multinational force. The Iraqi Air Force fighters, in addition to being killed in the early stages of the war more than 110, the rest can only be hidden in the basement every day. Do not dare to show their heads. This is Saddam did not expect at all. In order to save the precious combat aircraft, he made a plan, ready to evacuate the remaining hundreds of warplanes to the neighboring country of Iran, in order to avoid the air raids of the multinational forces. Who would dare to think, fighting a decade of war between Iran and Iraq, in the end, but also have to count on others to help themselves? According to the plan, starting on January 26, Iraqi fighters began to sneak across the Iran-Iraq border one after another in small groups, at low altitude to avoid coalition radar. Such intensive transit immediately attracted the attention of the multinational force. The Americans once thought it was the Iraqi pilots. A large-scale defection, but as of January 28, a full 82 Iraqi fighters slipped across the border. So well-coordinated intensive action, and then say it is a pilot defection would not be justified. So the multinational force began to organize F-15 24-hour air patrols. Like a wall blocking the Iraqi-Iranian border, people send nickname Eagle Wall. In any case cannot let the Iraqi Air Force to run off. But the Iraqi Air Force did not intend to give up. They decided to use their own way to break through this wall. This burden fell on the shoulders of the Iraqi Air Force Mig-25. In fact, facing the Iraqi Air Force's fighter sequences, the MNF did not take the bulky Mig-25s into account, and cared more about the relatively more modern Mig-29s. Probably too much focused attention was given to the Iraqi Mig-29s, which failed to achieve any combat successes throughout the entire war, and were shot down quite a bit. On the contrary, the veteran Mig-25 performed the best in the air war. On the first night of the multinational force attack, a Mig-25 shot down a US F-18. And a few hours later, the Mig-25 managed to push back an EF-111 electronic warfare aircraft, exposing the U.S. fighters to anti-aircraft fire and quickly drying out an F-15E Strike Eagle. In the next confrontation, there were 4 F-15 to 2 Mig-25 launched 10 air-to-air missiles in succession, but the Mig-25 still rely on the traditional high-speed performance to retreat gracefully, and managed to maintain the dignity of the year's main fighter. So Saddam gave special instructions that all fighters were to be withdrawn from the territory. But only the Mig-25 had to stay. It was, after all, the only fighter that had a chance to challenge the F-15 Eagle Wall, and it was just such a wall-breaking mission that Captain Awad and Captain Samarra, who had taken off in the afternoon of January 30, were on. Captain Awad and Captain Samurai did not attack blindly. They executed a pincer tactic that they had carefully done their homework. When the 4-aircraft formation in the Eagle Wall rotates to refuel in the air, there will only be 2 F-15s left in the air. And then the 2 Mig-25s will launch a surprise attack from different directions at the same time, with one Mig-25 being responsible for attracting the attention of the F-15's Foot 2 aircraft formation, and the other one from the flanks, using the advantage of speed to rapidly draw close to the distance and launching an attack, which will greatly increase the probability of success. For this reason, the Iraqi army has been closely monitoring US movements with what little radar it has left, and originally wanted to launch an operation on January 28, but never found the opportunity to do so. Finally came to the afternoon of January 30, the opportunity came. The Iraqi Army electronic listening system, monitoring the US warplanes and the base of radio communications, learned that an F-15 4-plane formation of 2 fuel alarm must be south for aerial refueling, at this point in the air. There are only 2 F-15s left to carry out counterclockwise patrol flights, this window of time, at least 1.5 hours. Seizing the opportunity, the 2 Mig-25s quickly took off and climbed to an altitude of 13,000 meters, east of Baghdad, in a pincer attack. Captain Samurai locked onto the target first, followed by an R-40, But then he regretted it. As far as the eye could see, he saw the missile blow up, but there were no planes around, and no blown-up debris. What he had locked onto was not an F-15, but rather an inversion of the atmosphere at high altitude, which had created an artifact on the radar. This mistake caused the two MiG-25s to merge and turn back west, while their real target remained 60 kilometers to the east, and an E-3 Sentinel AWACS in southern Saudi Arabia alerted the twin F-15 formation as soon as the MiGs appeared. But the alert was cancelled when the MiGs were seen to be heading west. However, only seconds after the MiG-25 completed its turn, the Iraqi Ground Intercept Command, clearly identifying this lone F-15 twin formation by radar, ordered the MiGs to turn around and attack again. The MiG-25s in double formation turned on the acceleration, quickly accelerated to Mach 2 and rushed towards the F-15s. At this point, they could not care less about the envisioned pincer tactics. The US E-3 AWACS was once again on the two MiG-25s and began frantically alerting the F-15s of the incoming enemy aircraft in double strike formation, which were piloted by Captain Thomas Dietz and Lieutenant Robert Heeman, who upon receiving the alert also turned to face the enemy head-on, accelerating to Mach 1.8 in preparation to meet them. All four jets were now at full power, heading straight for their opponents. Although the MiG-25 was 2,000 meters higher than the F-15, the MiG's antiquated radar was severely hampered by its lack of downward visibility, leaving the 80-kilometer range R-40 air-to-air missiles on their hangars. Heeman, flying an F-15, first locked onto the target and fired an AIM-7 Sparrow at Samurai. However, the missile failed at the critical moment. Its rocket motor didn't fire at all, and it fell off the missile's hangar. Heeman called it unreliable and hurriedly fired another Sparrow, which was successfully launched this time. Meanwhile, Samurai, who was sweating profusely at the sound of the incoming missile warning, finally locked onto Heeman's F-15 as well and quickly fired an R-40 air-to-air missile. The two fighters locked onto each other were equal to not locking onto each other, and each was forced to start making maneuvering turns to get away from the incoming missiles, Samurai to the north and Heeman to the south. But Samurai held out until the last moment of target loss, guiding the R-40 to reach the side of the Heeman F-15 and blow it up, damaging its left engine. While the southern front was firing at each other, the northern front was not idle either. Dietz's F-15 first locked onto the Awad, but encountered the same situation as Heeman's. The Sparrow's engine struck and it fell straight off its mount, and he rushed to make up for the second missile strike again. Stayed on the hangars, simply did not respond. Dietz simply crazy. Choose the third AIM-7 and then shoot. But this one and the first one, the same, fell from the hangars. This is what mess are. The US Empire's military-industrial complex are all Saddam spies, said the AIM-7 Sparrows. It is said that the AIM-7 Sparrow is unreliable, but pour into this is I did not expect. But the opposite side of the Awad has arrived. A shot to the Dietz R-40 is already on the way. The Dietz F-15 cockpit of the missile incoming alarm sounded non-stop. Already have no time to toss the fourth Sparrow. Can only quickly turn to the north to maneuver to avoid. By this time, Heeman on the southern line had taken a blow to the engine, but had little problem, and after turning south turned north again to continue tracking Samurai. Then followed him as he turned west and managed to lock onto Samurai, launching an AIM-7. But he didn't have time to steer the Sparrow toward the target because he crashed into Awad, who was angry about the loss of Dietz, and immediately locked onto the F-15 that had crashed into his guns, ready to take it out on him. In the face of Awad's death chase, Heeman realized the situation was bad and couldn't be bothered to guide the Sparrow, and started dropping foils and heat flares like crazy, maneuvering while steering to the east, and leaving the Sparrow to its own devices as far as that Sparrow was concerned. At this point, both F-15 pilots had had enough of the bad stuff, and the lead pilot, Dietz, ordered a retreat to the east, and the two MiG-25s retreated west as well as they saw fit. But the two F-15s that had run off to refuel were by now flying back to help their brothers. The lead Lieutenant Cole Bigham thought his two-plane formation should be able to get around Baghdad and intercept the two returning Foxbats, so he took his wingman and headed northwest. But a 140-knot side wind high in the sky blew them off course and over the Iraqi capital, Baghdad, which was no better than it is today, with SAM-2 and 3 anti-aircraft missiles arranged like hedgehogs, and radar alarms ringing off the hook on the two F-15s, but presumably in order to avoid accidentally wounding the MiG-25s, the surface-to-air missiles were not fired. Although the lieutenant colonel and his men followed the MiG-25s over the base, they were unable to harm the MiGs after firing 4 AIM-7s in succession, and had to watch them land. They themselves had to leave the airfield before the Iraqi surface-to-air missiles opened fire. The entire battle, with 2 Foxbats intact and 1 F-15 slightly damaged, was essentially a draw. But this result was not honorable for the F-15, which had kept pace with the times and repeatedly upgraded, and instead became a highlight for the venerable Mig-25, as Samail and Awad accomplished what many thought was impossible in the face of an overwhelming disadvantage. It was also the closest the F-15C ever came to being shot down in an air battle. Only this episode could not change the battlefield dynamics, and the Samura air battle became a comeback for the Iraqi Air Force. A few days later, the multinational force had taken complete control of Iraq's airspace, and a few weeks later, Saddam announced his withdrawal from Kuwait. But those 100 or so airplanes he smuggled to Iran never came back, and Iran inexplicably got such a huge pile of loot for nothing, which has yet to be returned. Thank you for seeing the end. Tossing such a long piece is not more than carrying. It is not easy, if you like. Remember to leave a praise before you go. Pay attention to me, to bring you interesting technology stories, so that we can see you in the next issue.